This program is made possible by funding from the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, where government leaders, business executives, and academic experts come together to discuss major issues facing the state of Florida.
This morning of introducing our first speaker, and that's the Honorable Tom Murphy. He is a senior resident fellow at ULI specializing in urban development. He has extensive experience in urban revitalization, what drives investment, what ensures long-lasting commitment. Since January 2006, Mr. Murphy has served as ULI's Gulf Coast liaison, helping to coordinate with leadership in New Orleans and the public to implement ULI's rebuilding recommendations after Hurricane Katrina. He also works with leadership in other hurricane-impacted areas. Prior to his service with ULI, Mr. Murphy served 3 terms as mayor of Pittsburgh. That was from 1994 to 2005. During that period, he initiated a public-private partnership strategy to leverage more than $4.5 billion in economic development in the city. Mr. Murphy also served 8 terms in the Pennsylvania State House of Representatives from 1979 to 1993, just prior to his role as mayor. He focused legislative activities on changing Western Pennsylvania's economy from industrial to entrepreneurial. And from Pittsburgh myself, I know the culture there. That was a very difficult thing to even attempt. He holds a master's degree in urban studies from Hunter College and a bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry from John Carroll University. Please welcome the Honorable Tom Murphy. Thank you.
I am delighted to be here, and so what does a guy from Pittsburgh have to say about Orlando? What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about some of the things I've learned over the last few years with traveling with ULI around the country and the kind of trends that are really beginning to, I think, shape cities. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about Pittsburgh because I think there is some lessons to be learned, believe it or not, from if we can do it in Pittsburgh, anybody can, in terms of turning ourselves around. And then third, sort of the general lessons that came out of that. And the first is I'm going to give you a quiz. How many of you have ever heard of Horatio Nelson Jackson? Come on, he changed your life. Horatio Nelson Jackson was a doctor from Vermont. I'm going to tell you the story. And he was in California at a medical convention. He was out to dinner with a group of other doctors, and they were debating what the impact of the automobile was going to be on American society. And all the other doctors thought it was a toy for the rich, a toy. There was no infrastructure. There was no gas stations, really no roads, not a lot that made it easy to drive an automobile. And they were debating that, and Horatio said, I can drive across the country in 90 days. And they all laughed and bet him each $50 that he wouldn't be able to do it. And the very next day, Horatio went out and bought his first car, and he convinced the young mechanic, Sewell Crocker, to go with him. For whatever reasons, they bought a dog named Bud that day. And the very next day, with no support and no great thought about it, they were on the road driving across the United States. 63 and a half days later, they drove down Fifth Avenue in New York City. They were the first people to drive across the United States. That was 1903. In 1903, there were 8,000 cars in America, 150 miles of paved road, and no highway department in any state. In 1923, 20 years later, sort of what we plan in our lives, 20 years later, there were 10 million cars, hundreds of thousands of miles of paved road, and a highway department in every state. The world as we knew it in society changed in 20 years, remarkably. We're sitting now where Horatio Nelson Jackson sat in 1903. And every city in America, in the world for that matter, needs to be where Horatio look out into the future and understand that the rules that define how we govern ourselves and run cities and grow cities are fundamentally getting thrown out. It's changing, and if cities are going to be successful, they're going to be successful because they understand that the rules are redefined. Globalization is defining how we buy goods and sell goods and work all across the world. I was in Tampa yesterday, and they're chasing the China traffic coming through as every port across the Atlantic coast and through the Gulf Coast is when the Panama Canal expands in another 2 years. And that is a huge issue because it will create thousands of jobs or not in Tampa and Gulfport or Norfolk or a host of other places that succeed in getting that. And so globalization is redefining how we do business. I don't need to tell you about technology. And if you saw the movie The Social Network, you know that they were happy when they got to 1 million people on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook, but there's 500 million people now around the world on Facebook. It's fundamentally redefined how we communicate with each other. And the demographics of the fact that we're adding in the United States 120 million more people over the next 20 years. And driving from Tampa to Orlando last night at 5:30, you have a problem. When you add another, and when you over the next 10 years, you're going to add another, 500 to 700,000 people to your population. That means another 350,000 or 400,000 households are going to be built here. Can you imagine that construction happening in the same sort of an Ozzie and Harriet way that's happened over the last 50 years? That means Tampa's your suburb, or you're a suburb of Tampa, depending on how you look at it, right? Is that those are challenges that will redefine how cities succeed or don't succeed as we compete. And you're in the middle of it now. You're at a Horatio Nelson Jackson moment now. These are cities across the country. I'm not going to ask you to measure it, but is the employment changes happening in cities around the country. Look at Boston. Boston lost 55% of its manufacturing jobs in the last 20 years, but added 42% increase in education and health. What is that in raw numbers? It means that Boston lost almost 100,000 jobs in manufacturing, but added 150,000 jobs in healthcare. And look at you. You are a technology city now. Are you acting like it? Are you focused on your education so that the kids will be able to get these jobs you're creating? Are you thinking about land use issues? And so you've lost 28% of your manufacturing jobs, but you've added 310% increase in 20 years of professional and business services and 152% in education and health services, when at the same time most people would think Orlando would be a leisure and hospitality place, only increased 63%. I just wanted to mention the raw numbers. You went from having 48,000 people working in education, health services in 1990 to 121,000 people now. You more than doubled your technology people. They're the growth industries in Orlando. Are you recognizing that and acting like it? Because it's fundamentally going to change your community. It's going to define where your kids will work. And the kind of education they need to compete in a whole new economy that's being created. It's diversifying your economy, which means if you have downturn in the tourism business, your education, health, and technology stuff might keep you healthy. It's great value-added jobs. And so it's thinking about how you begin to position your community to take advantage of what you're already beginning to see in this. And these are the traits I believe that cities need to be competitive in the 21st century. Are you a 20th century city? Are you sort of acting like a 20th century city, meaning we were a tourism city and we were, a sun city, and that's our 20th century city, and now we're a 21st century city. And we're going to be a technology-driven city, and besides being what we historically was. And so we have different rules to make that work. And one is being well-managed. The second is vibrant. I'm going to talk about these. The third is being educated. The fourth is having the raw materials, which I'll talk about. The fifth is being entrepreneurial, of how you capture a bright young person who's going to the university here who have an idea. and want to create a company, and they're going to stay here, or they're going to go like the social network guys did to California, because that's where the venture capital was available. And that's the sixth piece of that is capital. One of the big challenges for America in regions in America that is not a challenge in most of the rest of the world, in Europe or in China, is that we love our governments. You got that? This guy here and I were talking about the role of government before, right? We love our governments. You know, if I'm in Europe, I'm in England, or I'm in China, these decisions about education and land use and a lot of other are top-down decisions. Here, in America, we have 74,000 local governments, and we have 13,000 school districts that make choices about how communities are going to succeed or fail. And the ability of a region to work together becomes a critical piece of your success. You know, if I'm coming to Disney World, people will say, "Where are you going?" I might say, "I'm going to Orlando." And they'll immediately say, "I'm going to Disney World." I'm not even sure Disney World's in Orlando, is it? Or at least some of it's not, is it? And yet, so that's your brand in a way right now. And how you can work together as a region to talk to the rest of the world becomes a huge issue about how you compete in this global economy. The first part of that list was well managed, and often people take this for granted. But if a city's not run well, if people don't feel safe, if it's not clean, nobody wants to work, play, or have a business there. And I use this as a dramatic example of where a city made a decision to change its behavior. And this is New York City. And in the 70s and the 80s, if you were going to New York City, the conversation was about whether you were going to get mugged on the subway or whether even you were going to get murdered. Look at the homicide rate in New York City. It was almost 2,500 people a year getting killed. New York City now has the lowest crime rate per capita in the United States of any major city, because the mayor, Rudy Giuliani, and the police commissioner made a decision to change behavior. They basically said, New York is not going to succeed unless we manage it well. And it's not that there were fewer bad guys in New York City, and so the crime rate all went down. It is that they made a conscious decision to manage in a different way, to use technology, and to deal with crime, which has been copied by a lot of cities around the country right now. And so I use this when I go to cities, and you know, there are sort of conditions that people have gotten used to. The crime rate might be in a downtown area, you know, a little higher than it should be, and people sort of say, well, you know, it is what it is, right? Or there's graffiti, or there's litter on the street, and people, you go to cities and it's just, you know, it's just what it is. It doesn't have to be that. This is the clearest example I've seen in America where you can say that behavior doesn't have to be like that. We can change that behavior by being smart about how we manage. The second is vibrancy. This is the Millennium Park in Chicago, which is now the single biggest tourist attraction in Chicago. It's a park, but it really celebrates whether it's the middle of February in Chicago, which is not the middle of February in Orlando, or whether it's a wonderful summer day in Chicago. It is a place where people celebrate being together. And if I have a technology community, I have an economy that is driving towards people that are going to be a creative economy. Those people want to live in a place that's fun to live. I went for a run last night around the lake right over here. I could hardly run. It was so crowded. People walking dogs, just enjoying a wonderful place in Orlando. Cities that create those places are cities that are going to compete in the 21st century. You have that. There's been some really smart visionary leadership in the past years here that have created some great places in Orlando. And you ought to, one, treasure those and understand that you can't take them for granted and you need to build on them. The third area is education, really, and this is this is you benchmarked against some other cities, technology cities, and and you're doing okay, but you're not doing as good as you can do. If I look at your high school graduation rate, you're a couple points above the national average, but look at poor Pittsburgh. At the bottom there, we went from 77% graduation rate in 1990 to 91% now. We went by you because we made a decision in Pittsburgh that education was critical to our economic success. Every kid that graduates from the Pittsburgh Public High School gets a $40,000 scholarship. The business community in Pittsburgh raised that money. We copied from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Now, I want to say that again. Every kid that graduates from the Pittsburgh Public Schools with a B average gets a $40,000 scholarship to college. Is that a motivation to go to high school and to stay there? You want to move to Pittsburgh now? When you're looking at those college tuitions, it's a pretty good idea. But then your child will need to go to a college and university in Pittsburgh or a technical school or in Pennsylvania. I say that because it's the recognition is that, and I'll talk about this more, that we needed to move from one culture to another. And we had an imperative to do that, which I'll get into. And you see in bachelor's degrees, you're doing okay. You're a little bit above the national average. Where you need to focus is in the graduate degrees. And the graduate degree people are important because they're the drivers of technology. They're the drivers of innovation. That measures in part the research happening here. And that this is all about a commitment of a community making choices about where they want to invest their resources. Even in a time when you have states whacking education budgets, both higher education and local education, in a sense, I mean, you're cutting off the very important pieces of what will continue to feed your success and economy. The fourth area is raw materials. The investment in research. In the United States, we on average invest almost $400 billion a year in research. This is NIH and the Department of Defense and a host of other places. This is both public and private, philanthropic foundations that invest in research. And it is our competitive advantage as a country. By far, the United States invests in research more so than any other country in the world, Japan, China included, and it is what has continued to fuel the U.S. economy, is that we have been an innovative society, and we have seen those investments all across America in really places that are you wouldn't think as technology places, and for example, the Florida legislature and the governor in 2006 appropriated $310 million, which they gave the Scripps Research Institute to move to Jupiter, Florida, to seed a technology economy there. And it's growing. There's several other institutes there. There's a medical school there. In New Orleans, you don't think of New Orleans as a technology hub, but there's $2 billion being spent down there now to build a medical complex and a research complex to try to seed a technology economy. And even more counterintuitive is Las Vegas, where Las Vegas raised significant money and gave land to Cleveland Clinic to entice them to open up a research facility in Las Vegas. And the colorful mayor of Las Vegas says it's a medical tourism. You can come and get your heart operated on and gamble at the same time, right? And these investments are not frivolous. They're about trying to diversify your economy, which is already happening, as we saw in Orlando. And here in Central Florida, you are looking at in UCF almost $115 million a year of research coming into there. You're the seventh largest research park in America right now in this area. You have the medical city, which is really beginning to redefine in many ways Central Florida. One of the best examples in the country, I think, is the Research Triangle in North Carolina. And I want to tell you the story because the story really encapsulates leadership and vision. This really starts by six guys out playing golf one day and getting rained on and going into the clubhouse and this is a true story, by the way, and lamenting the fact that they educate their sons and daughters to go to college. They pay all the money, and then there was no reason why they would come back to North Carolina because all there was to work in was tobacco and lumber. And no 6 guys went out and bought 4,600 acres of land and created a nonprofit entity called the Research Triangle, partnered with government to put in the infrastructure, partnered with the universities, the 3 universities around there, to create what is now a remarkable economic driver. Redefine North Carolina. 40,000 jobs, the highest per capita education of any area in the country. If you've been to Raleigh or Chapel Hill, you know, that, or Durham, you see the impact of what civic leadership did and a commitment to making a difference. And I don't know that every city can replicate that, but I think that cities can take a real lesson for the choices that communities make of what kind of community they want to be. And the Research Triangle showed that. The final piece is venture capital, the variability of capital. If I'm a young woman or a young man here in Central Florida and I want to start a company and I have an idea and I've borrowed some money from my dad and my mom and my uncles to get the company to a point, and now I need to take it bigger. How many of you saw The Social Network? You know that if you go see it, it's a good movie. They start this. They have this idea, and they need to now take it to some scale, and they need to get some risk capital. How easy is that available here? Because it's key to driving a technology economy, this availability of capital. And it was a lesson that we certainly learned in the Pittsburgh area. So the United States by far has more venture capital available than any place else in the world. The bad part of the story is that almost 2/3 of the venture capital invested in the United States invested in 3 areas, in the Boston area, in New York, and in California. And so that bright young woman who has a great idea in Orlando is likely to go to one of those 3 areas to try to raise the money, and the odds are they then move their company there. And so that's why in this competition, it becomes very important for you. This is your venture capital availability and the investments of venture capital in the Central Florida area over the last 10 years. And you know what? You've done pretty well. This is not bad. It's not the best, but it's not bad. It shows that you have at least a fledgling venture capital industry here that if I'm a young person or old person that has a great idea that looks like it can be taken into the marketplace, that there's some money availability. And as we look out over the next 5 years, and this is a survey by the Venture Capital Association and Deloitte, you know, they really identify a number of areas, but 3 that jump out really is clean technologies, solar and battery powered, so that we don't need to rely on as an area where they're going to be looking to make venture capital investments. 80% believe that. The next one is really healthcare, which is one of your competitive advantages with your medical city, is the opportunity to not only have great research and attract some companies there, but think about how you have a homegrown spin-off of people that have ideas coming out of the research going on there. And the third really is something that didn't even exist 5 years ago, which is new media and social network of how that world is going to change. I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about Pittsburgh, where I was mayor for 12 years and have lived all my life, and talk about it because it is a story of we can figure out how to do this, anybody can. The advantage we have, and I say advantage, is that we were in full-scale collapse. Between 1970 and 1990, we lost 500,000 people from the Pittsburgh region. This is not just from the city, this is from the whole region. Left because the steel mills were collapsing. We were losing all those mills, and we were a city that had the legacy of heavy manufacturing. Our air and our water and our land where the mills were largely polluted. And we needed to redefine ourselves, and that change is always difficult. We really had no choice in many ways because we were collapsing, but nevertheless it's very difficult to get people to change. You, on the other hand, have been doing okay. And so you have less of an imperative to change how you behave. And so Pittsburgh has gone from a city that was probably the most environmentally degraded city in America to one now, this past 2 years, ranked by The Economist magazine and Forbes magazine as the most livable city in America. How does that happen? How do you move from being a city that, you know, was defined as hell with the lid off to one now that is seen as the most livable city in America? It happened because of a lot of civic leadership, not just political leadership, but civic leadership. And I want to just touch very quickly on a couple of deals because it's about public-private partnerships, how the public sector and the private sector come together around a shared vision of doing something. This is a steel mill in Pittsburgh. It's 127 acres, and when I became mayor, we bought this site. It had been vacant. The mill had shut down, but the mill looked like this. For me, it was a very emotional place because my father had worked here for 51 years in this steel mill. And now if you go to Pittsburgh, you'll see that where 10,000 men and women made steel along with my father, there's a cheesecake factory. And my father would shoot me if he were alive, right? But it really sort of typifies the transformation of, on that 127 acres, besides a cheesecake factory, there's hundreds of units of housing and a lot of retail and probably 15 or 20 buildings of that house technology companies that have now begun to grow up in Pittsburgh. And we put $130 million of public money in that, of cleaning it up, taking the buildings down, putting in infrastructure, and attracted a significant private investment. There's a public-private sharing of a vision, is that we would take our old industrial property and transform it from a liability into a model of the kind of development we wanted to do. This is another one. This is a slag dump. Slag's a byproduct of steel. It's like a cinder that comes from cooking all the ingredients to make steel, and it's not particularly toxic, but there's a lot of it. This is a 250-acre site, and that face you see there is 300 feet deep. It had been dumped there for 90 years. We bought this. Even some of the developers thought we were nuts, but now there's 700 new homes there. It's a new urbanist development, and it's the most successful development in the Pittsburgh region, outperforming all the suburban developments. And it, again, it's a public-private partnership. It was getting the public sector and the private sector to come together to share risk, and because nobody knew if anybody would ever live on a slag dump, and understanding how you move that forward. We took our riverfronts. When I was growing up in Pittsburgh, my mother would always say two things to me: be home before the streetlights come on, and she would always say, never go near the rivers, she said, because if you go in those rivers, you're going to melt, because they were so badly polluted. And now we have almost 30 miles of riverfront park in Pittsburgh that people enjoy every day. Part of the driver, a key driver, was the partnership we built with the universities. This is with Carnegie Mellon University. We actually financed this building. It's sort of a stepped-up incubator. It's where companies like Microsoft and Google, who are doing joint research, it was CMU professors would hang their hat. There'd be 20 or 30 people there. And Google, 2 years ago now, announced that they are locating 900 jobs in Pittsburgh and taking an old abandoned Nabisco factory in Pittsburgh and converting it to their operations there. Part of what drove this was we worked very hard to create venture capital availability. There are now 17 venture capital firms headquartered in Pittsburgh. Scott's going to speak in a little while. He might mention some of this. And Pittsburgh is now 20th on the list over the last 10 years, from 97 to 2007 is the last information I have, is 20th on the list of regions in the country with the amount of venture capital they're receiving. But we had the biggest increase in the country with 513% because we started at nothing, in effect. Very quickly, I'll end with the 6 lessons I've learned is that somebody needs to be a leader at bringing people together to make this happen, of redefining what your region ought to look like. There needs to be that strategy of how you drive that. There needs to be the institutional capacity. Who does this? Who on the public sector is smart enough to begin to be sophisticated enough to pull together the financing of these difficult deals that have risk involved, and can not, I would always say we want these developers to make money. We just don't want our pockets to be picked. And so who can understand the market well enough to understand, to make these changes, to make this happen? And people have been doing it here. You have this here because Medical City and some of the other developments that I've heard about and read about and have seen are demonstrate to me that you have this institutional capacity. Understanding how you finance the infrastructure. And I want to talk about infrastructure because too many times people think of infrastructure as roads, sewer, and water. And the infrastructure for this kind of industry is what I would call intellectual infrastructure. It's a different kind of infrastructure. It's sort of like you have the coal in the ground. And that coal in the ground is going to stay there unless you build an infrastructure to get it out of the ground and move it to markets. And it's same with the research going on in the universities. That's the raw material. That research is the infrastructure in your community. What's going on in Medical City at the university here? It's the infrastructure in your city. The question of how you get it out of the ground. The incubators, the lawyers and the accountants, the venture capital, the technology transfer rules at the university, all are part of the intellectual infrastructure that moves this stuff out into the marketplace. And it's critical that people think about a new kind of infrastructure. So when you, as a community, debating whether you're going to expand Interstate 4 so you don't have to drive in that traffic every night, or invest in other kind of infrastructure that promotes a technology economy, they're choices you need to make as a community. Does the roads win or does the future win? That's a decision that you need to make. And so that's really the question. I skipped one, which is really, how many architects do we have here? So what were you guys smoking and drinking in the 60s and 70s? Because I feel like when I was mayor, I was trying to tear everything down that was built in the 60s and 70s. It's, the final piece on this, and I saw it when I went for my run. You have that wonderful lake. You have a great downtown historic neighborhood. Somebody is paying attention to design. Cities that succeed will not have a disease in the water that I find in a lot of cities called it'll-do disease. There'll be cities that say, if we're going to build something, we're going to build to a very high quality. We're going to reach rather than reach to the lowest common denominator. And that defines your city. Orlando has had a history of building some particular spectacular things. You need to understand that it is now your responsibility to do that. And so finally, I want to end by saying that we're in the middle, we're where Horatio Nelson Jackson was. We're sitting there looking out at the future. And we can use the old rules, as those other doctors did when they were with Horatio, out to dinner one night, and that will define the choices we make as a community. Or we can recognize that the rules are going to change, as Horatio did, and that this particular invention is going to redefine society. And we can start to think about what the new rules are going to look like. And that's where you all are in Orlando and in this region. You're sitting at that moment. You've built a good foundation. You're like this jigsaw puzzle. You need to decide now as a community whether you want to pull those pieces together and build a world-class city. Good luck.
I think he issued us a challenge. I want to talk a little bit about connecting this back to real estate and thinking about something that Tom was talking about. There's a lot more to infrastructure than just thinking about roads and so on. And thinking about what we do in real estate is creating the places where jobs occur. And so there's, as Tom pointed out, there are a lot of things that are required to create economic development, to sustain and grow jobs. Tom talked a lot about leadership, about having a vision, about the importance of education, about being adaptable, being ready to make changes in industry. And one of the things that we do in our industry, in the land use field, is we are creating and sustaining the places where jobs grow. And I want to talk a little bit about the geography of how that happens. When we've gone out and studied about 15 different areas across the country to understand where are the places that jobs grow, and we've found that regions are comprised of a hierarchy of centers, and we understand this when we think about where we shop. We know that we're going to have neighborhood centers about every 2 miles or so, and regional malls repeat themselves about every 8 miles or so. And there's reasons for that as far as how far we'll travel, accessibility to markets and so on. And jobs seem to work like that too. If you look, did a GIS and looked at where jobs are in the region, you'd see jobs spread out all over the place. But then you'd start to look at where are the export-oriented jobs, the jobs that are bringing new dollars into the region. You'll find that those tend to concentrate in a few places, and that the number, the quality, the characteristics of those job core areas that we create have a big influence on how we experience job growth. And if we can think about that when we're thinking about our job infrastructure, not only our roads, but our transit, our education, and so on, and understand that there's some predictability to why jobs go where they go, and understand the criteria for why jobs want to be in certain kinds of places, then we can better focus our economic development efforts, think about the features, the amenities, the infrastructure, and so on that we need to create in order to make that happen. And by these job cores, these are some of the places that I mean that we have in our region. I could put many more up there. Are the biggest, obviously, downtown, but Disney obviously is one of those job core places. UCF and the Central Research Park, the Convention Center area, Maitland Center, Lake Mary, Heathrow. These are all very important concentrations of jobs in our region. And we had to dream of those places and create them. And we need to be continuing to dream and think about those places. We're going to talk about some of the new places that we are creating, and we need to think about creating more of those places in the future in order for us to continue to grow. So as we look out across the country and we look and see where these job centers are, we find large concentrations of employees, and we start to get an idea that although these places are all somewhat different, they all have unique characteristics, but we find some striking similarities in terms of the characteristics, and that starts to give us an idea of the kind of pattern that we need to maybe think about as we're planning our region. We find a very high correlation between the number of jobs that you find in a region and how many of these job core areas are created. And if you look at regions over time and look at how many of these places where they've created that infrastructure they have and how many jobs that they have, you find a very strong correlation. And there are a lot of reasons for that. We look at small metro areas, big metro areas, and we still find somewhere between 30 and 40% of all jobs, and typically the highest paying jobs, and particularly the jobs that are bringing new dollars into the region, focused in those places. This is a little XY graph. So on the up the side of the graph, you see the number of these economic centers in regions, and we've listed some of the areas that we've studied down at the bottom. And then on the bottom, on the y-axis, are the number of jobs that they have in the region. You can see a very strong correlation between the number of these places where jobs are grown and how many total jobs are found in the region. See, it's not a perfectly straight line, and there's a lot of reasons for that have to do with the kinds of investments and infrastructure that are made in those places. For example, we find a huge influence by transportation. As Tom pointed out, transportation is not the only thing, but it turns out to be a very important thing. We find that those centers tend to grow to a certain size. Some centers, some job centers get bigger than other centers, and a lot of that has to do with what's the density of the street network. Did they make investments in transportation? Did they make investments in encouraging more mixed-use development and putting more housing and other amenities closer to those jobs? And a lot of those variables have a lot to do with how big these job centers grow. Most of the key job centers in the country are located along major transportation infrastructure. And they tend to be, the best paying jobs tend to be clustered around intersections. And again, the cores with the most jobs tend to be mature areas with lots of transportation options. The places where you have system-to-system interchanges have the most jobs. In fact, we find that you can have double the numbers of jobs. If you look at where 408 crosses the 4, or the Turnpike and the 4, where major intersections where you have regional connections and connectivity to other areas. Airports and transit also play a role where you have that regional connectivity. A lot of different types of job centers, and I've listed a few just of the types that we find here in Central Florida, but we find the same pattern around looking at other regions. The original urban core, catalytic job centers. Somebody had to dream of UCF once upon a time and then fight hard to create the research park there. Those were catalysts. Disney was a catalyst. Somebody made a decision about where to put that, and that became a catalyst which created jobs. Similarly for the convention center. Industrial cores that tend to be located where you have exchanges from one form of transportation to another, and certainly major transportation access and so forth. So there's reasons why these job cores occur where they occur. In smaller metro areas, the typical, less than 1.5 million jobs have about 8 of these job cores, about 38,000, about 30,000 jobs in a core. About 38% of all jobs tend to occur in those places. And again, when we look at larger job regions, it's the same, about 38%. They tend to have more of these job core centers of where they're creating jobs. And trying to understand how this is happening in our region and how that should be influencing our thinking about planning for job growth, our thinking about planning for infrastructure investments. We look at 3 different areas. Where are the existing cores? How will those cores evolve? Is the infrastructure and investment there to enable those job core areas to continue growing? Where are the emerging cores? Tom talked a little bit about what's happening to Lake Nona, and Richard's going to share a little more about that with us. So where the emerging cores, the places where we believe we'll have more than 25,000 jobs by 2030. And then, as well as we can tell, where are some of the likely new job cores going to be based on where public investments are being made, where our public policies are supporting planning in those areas, where there is private sector investment and private landowners who are making investments that we can capitalize on, where we can grow jobs in the future. So we try to understand where those places are spatially. We also look at where are the places that are gaining and losing market share. And this is just a real quick sort of snapshot looking at growth. And what this shows when you look at, score of 1 on this chart, just to make it simple, means you're at equilibrium. Less than 1, you're losing market share. More than 1, you're gaining market share. And what this shows is that the I-4 corridor actually is losing market share, and that's been happening for a while. That doesn't mean it's not growing. It means that it's losing market share. So when we think about things like Sunrail and the ability to continue to expand I-4, well, we know we're limited there. And what something like Sunrail does is enable those job centers along I-4 to continue to grow. In the meantime, we look at where's the momentum. And what the momentum shows us is that the growth momentum, and this is a trend that's been going on for 20 years, we shouldn't be surprised by it, is to the southeast area. Orange continuing to grow in the southeast area. Osceola, strong growth. Lake growth there, at least there has been. We'll see how that plays out politically. But jobs aren't going in that direction. The job growth is to the southeast area. This is a quick snapshot, zooming out and looking at Tampa and Orlando, and using where office buildings are located as a proxy for where some of the best jobs have concentrated. This is looking pre-1980, 1980 to 89, 90 to 94, 95 to 2000. I'm just going to kind of click through these quickly. 2000 to 2004, and then 2005 plus of where decisions have been made. And you can see over time, let me zoom in a little bit on our area, how that's happened largely along I-4 and then moving to the east towards 417, towards UCF, and more recently towards Lake Nona. You can see in 80 to 85, 85, 90, you see the what's happening, the infill up along I-4 and into Lake Mary. Early 1990s, you see Celebration popping up there in the 95 to 2000 period. Continuing infill along I-4 and growth in office and technology space at UCF. And you sort of look at where the pattern is most recently, and again, it's filled in along I-4. I-4 is fairly maxed out. It's moved to the east towards 417, towards UCF, and towards Lake Nona. And again, that's a long-term trend. When we put all those measures together, and there's about 20 different things get plugged into the model, and as we look farther into the future, the crystal ball gets a little hazier, but the green dots show where we have existing employment cores. And one thing you notice about them right away is they don't necessarily correspond to our political boundaries. So when we think about our future transportation options and the things that we want to connect, they may include our existing 19th century plans from when we were an agricultural economy, but we're shifting, as Tom pointed out, into this technology economy. And so where are the places that we want to connect? They are in some cases new places, and so we want to think about new infrastructure that we need to do that. The orange dots are where we have emerging employment centers, so you can see some of those moving north on 75 in the Tampa area. Lake Nona on there underneath the 417 dot. And we can see some blue dots where there are potential new cores where both public sector and private sector entities are acting to make things happen. They may or may not happen as they'd like, depending on the sort of investments in infrastructure that we make or don't make. When we look at the job forecast, we look at the number of jobs that we expect to grow over the next 20 years, and we think about having enough job centers, we believe we need 4 of those places in the next 20 years where we're going to grow jobs. So we have what's happening at Lake Nona. We have Orange County figuring out that maybe we're going to do Innovation Way. We'll see. You know, do we really have the political will to make that happen or not? That's a bit up in the air right now. We have what Osceola County is doing in their Northeast District, hoping to capitalize on what's happening in Medical City. And then the 4th center, you know, where is that? We don't know. But we need to be thinking about where are these places, or can we be strengthening our existing cores by making additional investments in infrastructure there? But we need to do one or the other. Will the places that we create be infill or greenfield? Well, chances are we're going to do a lot more infill than we have in the past. Great opportunity for that. It's very attractive to communities for a lot of reasons. But it's probably unlikely, given the scale of growth, hard to believe thinking about where we are in the recession. But looking at that chart that Tom showed us earlier of what our trajectory is and what our potential is, there will be growth, and it's unlikely that we'll be able to rely on infill alone. So we probably need to be thinking about doing better greenfield development as well. And then finally, we need to think about what is our economic development model? How are we going to grow jobs here? Are we elephant hunting? Are we looking for that next big thing, the next Scripps or Burnham Institute? Hopefully we'll capture some elephants along the way. Or are we farming? Are we creating the great places, providing the infrastructure, the public policies, supporting the catalysts like UCF? Are we fostering a catalytic environment? You know, do we have the venture capitalists? Are we assisting the institutions that are engaged in those activities to attract jobs to our area? Who can we attract? Who would we like to be here? And do we have the things in place that they want to have when they come here? The quality of life, you know, are we creating those urban walkable places? Are we investing in green, healthful living that we know people are looking for? What about arts and culture? We know arts and culture are very important economic drivers. Have we thought about this idea of centers? Do we have a centers-based growth policy to be creating these new places? And are we thinking in terms of the mega region, our connection to Tampa? You saw on the chart I threw up on the dots, one of the things it showed us is while Orlando is growing to the southeast, Tampa is growing towards us. So how do we accommodate that? So what I'd like to do next is engage in a conversation about some of those issues, and I'd invite our panelists up, and I'll introduce the panelists. To my left is Richard Levy. As Vice President of Lake Nona Property Holdings, Richard oversees Lake Nona's master planning, land use entitlements, community design, government relations, environmental permitting, development permitting, asset management, and community governance programs. I think with all that, you probably don't have much time to go grab coffee. He also has had a great record in being an important part of our community for a long time. Richard has over 30 years experience. He worked here with the city. He joined Lake Nona in 2007, and he's directed the redesign of the master plan to accommodate the medical city concept that we're excited about. And in addition to Lake Nona, Richard provides development services to many of Tavistock's other holdings in the U.S. and abroad. Next to Richard is Bill Moss. Bill is Senior Managing Director of the Florida region of C.B. Richard Ellis, and in his role, he's responsible for all the activities and operations of the firm's 8 Florida offices. C.B. Richard Ellis has grown to become Florida's largest full-service real estate services firm, providing a vast spectrum of value-added services to investors, developers, and occupiers. In his career, Bill has been a past president and board member of the Central Florida chapter of NAIOP, Metro board member of Central Florida YMCA, corporate counsel of the Greater Orlando Economic Development Council, University of Central Florida Downtown Advisory Board, SunTrust Administrative Board, and Greater Orlando Chamber of Commerce. Another busy guy. Thank you for being here. Tom, you've already met and heard from, and is going to further enlighten us in the discussion. Scott, Scott Ferris, thank you for being here. Scott is Chief Executive Officer of Planner Energy and founder and CEO of Planner Energy, which is a spin-out of the U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory. He's responsible for establishing and executing the company vision and direction across all functional areas, including business strategy, product development, and sales and marketing. He calls himself a serial entrepreneur because this is not his first entrepreneurial effort. Scott also sits on the board of directors for the Greater Orlando Chamber of Commerce, Metro Orlando Economic Development Commission, and Florida High Tech Corridor Council. Next to Scott is Gary Sane, who is president and CEO of Visit Orlando. He is responsible for leading the organization that markets and sells Orlando and helps keep us the #1 family destination in the world and one of the top meeting destinations in America. He's been recognized for his leadership as one of the most powerful people and forces in the meetings industry, and also as a very powerful force in Orlando, as a very influential tourism executive, one of the 50 most prominent people in the Orlando region, playing a very important role here. Gary devotes a large portion of his time and energy also to investing his time in our community, in civic and community affairs. He serves on the advisory council of UCF's Rosen College of Hospitality Management, the board of directors of Florida Citrus Sports Salvation Army, United Arts of Central Florida, and Central Florida Boy Scouts. So thank you for being here, Gary. Each of our panelists is going to take about 5 to 7 minutes giving their reaction to the comments that you heard, and then we'll engage in a conversation with some and invite you for some Q&A. Richard is going to start first. Richard? Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everybody. Mayor, welcome to Orlando. I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to this morning as a lifelong Cincinnati Bengals fan, to have the former mayor of Pittsburgh, who I could once finally get even for all the grief I've taken in every sports bar in the last 15 years. Mayor, your presentation was so inspiring. I can't even go into the football thing. I mean, I'll have to welcome you into my list of friends and associates, because your message is very powerful, and hopefully you'll see that we are actually executing on a number of things that you mentioned. And like Greg said, I've been asked to speak for a couple minutes about the Lake Nona Medical City. If you live in Central Florida, you can't avoid hearing much of the press and media attention, thanks to a large part to my colleague Rob Adams, our Vice President of Marketing, who's in the audience this morning. We've been able to draw a lot of attention to our project. We're a 7,000-acre project in southeast Orlando, adjacent to the International Airport. And I hope you can see these logos up here. This is, the mayor talked about the intellectual capital and the collaboration between institutions, government, and private industry as really the driver of innovation. And I think you'll see a living example of that in Lake Nona with the Nemours Children's Hospital, flagship hospital being built, 600,000 plus square feet, first phase, inpatient facility, major outpatient clinic for statewide services. Mayor, we stole the former CEO of Pittsburgh Children's, who is now the CEO of this facility. So you talk about intellectual capital transfer. You can do that by recruitment as well. Who's running Nemours Children's Hospital, the newest Veterans Administration hospital in the United States, the VA to the right of that photo there, 1.5 million square feet, all built at one time, an absolutely enormous project. If you haven't been out to see that, I'll show you some other aerials. You get a chance to see that. A major player here. And in fact, because of the relationship we have with the University of Central Florida, the newest College of Medicine in the United States, there towards the center of the photo, the VA was able to recruit the National Center for Medical Simulation, which will open up on the VA campus as well. So we're talking about bringing together intellectual assets and creating new opportunities the VA nationally recognized the importance of this location for future opportunities to develop simulation technologies in the medical field. The Sanford Burnham Institute, Mayor, you mentioned the Scripps Institute in 2006. Well, the other shoe to fall in that whole transaction with Governor Bush was the expansion of the Burnham Institute, now called the Sanford Burnham Institute, from La Jolla to Orlando, and it was another one of a public-private partnership creating 300 plus research jobs. And now the latest addition to our project is the University of Florida has seen the wisdom of what's happening here between the research and the clinical medical opportunities. They're going to be locating, and it's under construction right now, a research building where they'll locate their pharmacology program to take advantage of some of the drug discovery opportunities. In addition, they talk about the importance of education. Valencia Community College is adding a new campus to this area. A very, very important component, the public schools, new high school, new middle school. So you start to see this fabric of education and research and clinical medicine and how important it is to the future success of our regional economy. And really, these are the building blocks of building a biomedical cluster. You talk about starting with research, institutions like the Burnham Institute and the University of Florida, and then adding to that the College of Medicine, bringing together active clinical opportunities for those researchers to test and integrate their work with the educators and the practitioners in one location. And the real plum of this is the commerce that comes out of that. And you hope that those three pieces, research, education, and clinical medicine, produce the commercial activities, be it medical devices, be it new drug discovery. That is what this project is all about, and I think it plays directly into what you spoke about and how these things come about. Now, it's not easy. There are a lot of places doing it. Mayor, you said every city in the country is trying to do some form of this collaborative model, be it in medical technologies or other types of information technologies, but it's happening, and it has happened in our country. In California are two examples, and it's gone beyond that. We now have global competition. There are places now that this same approach is being taken. We're fortunate that we've got some great foundational partners that have started this process in Orlando, and we've got some great momentum, but it's not easy. The net result of what we have in place right now is plus or minus 4,200 jobs when you look at the relationship between the university, the research institution, the two hospitals, and again, the University of Florida. That's if we did nothing else today, and I would tell you that at least 90 to 95% of these jobs are brand new jobs in the marketplace that'll be in place in the fall of 2012. So there aren't too many places that we've seen across the state of Florida. Mayor, you would know this because you're traveling a lot. I don't know how many places around the country have this kind of job creation in one place. And again, we're not stopping there. There are a lot of things in the gestation period and incubation to add to this. But this is I think, one way of executing on the things that you talked about. You can't. We think you can't have a great place and a great employment center like this without having a residential component. And while Lake Nona has some 2,000 homes in it, ultimately going to be 11,000 homes, really the integrating the residential into the employment center and mixing those uses and creating a vibrant place is really important. So our first phase of residential construction is underway, and I would argue that in terms of required infrastructure, if we're answering the question today, what is the required infrastructure necessary? Mayor, you laid the predicate for the intellectual infrastructure and the collaboration. I think there are some other pieces here that are important to make these projects and these places really work. If we're really truly about placemaking, residential is extremely important. In my career, which is too long, I had a full head of hair when I started, is the problem has always been there was plenty of residential development go around, you couldn't find the jobs. Well, we've got the exact inverse here. We've got the jobs first, which is a unique opportunity to create a great place by adding in the residential. And this fall, you'll see the first phase of Laureate Park come out of the ground. Laureate Park named after Nobel laureates, and you'll see that the street names are all named after past winners of the Nobel Peace Prize in various particular disciplines. The second piece of required infrastructure is really a technology one, and that's fiber. We are working to bring, there's a program called Fiber to the Home, and I am not an expert in this by any means, but the importance of technology and access, the new infrastructure is incredibly important, connecting the home to the world. And while we're all connected one way or the other, the importance of the capacity to grow that connection for voice, data, video, business services, security, you name it. How many of us use our home from time to time is really our place of business. It's just going to be more important, and connecting Lake Nona to the state through a statewide network, and ultimately to a national network of high-speed capacity, and ultimately to the world, is really that next piece of required infrastructure that is so critical to making sure that we have a competitive advantage in the world marketplace. The third piece is really something that's not unique to Orlando, but because of how young Orlando is relative to growth and history of cities in the United States, we did not benefit from the interstate highway system. Most of our limited access highways, aside from I-4, are toll roads, whereas most cities you go to, you'll see the 200 series, 400 series interstate highway systems. Orlando missed that window, and we've missed up till now opportunities to tap into a fixed route transit system, and Sunrail is a hot topic in our region these days. And while this service, this first planned phase 1 and phase 2, don't come directly to Lake Nona, building the base infrastructure and building the system in Central Florida, be it Sunrail, if that's not the technology, some other technology. We think rail's critically important, linking our location to the main campus of the university and to downtown and some of those critical employment centers, the ease of mobility where people can have a choice of living and working where they want, making it easy to get to and from work is very, very important. And finally, the last piece is for what we see as required infrastructure is accessibility to the world, physical accessibility to the world. And our location just adjacent to the international airport, literally a 6-minute drive from the terminal to our location, we think is an advantage and a critical requirement. And hopefully Gary will touch upon the medical tourism aspect of our growing economy and the opportunity we have linking the airport to some key industries, and including our medical city here. Finally, you have to do the requisite economic study to justify your place in the world, and a number of them have been done. If we did nothing else today, because of multiplier effects, you can see we've circled it in red there, the number of jobs created because of what the investment that government, industry, private industry, our owners' foundation contributions, as well as the institutional expenditures, there'd be some 16,000 jobs created, and you can see a total economic impact of $5 billion. We think we're just at the very beginning. We think ultimately the potential for our cluster, if you will, Greg, as you define them, is in that 25 to 30,000 jobs range. And when you combine, that's not including the adjacent airport employment center. When you combine that with what we believe Medical City's potential is, I think you could look at an employment cluster that would rival downtown and rival the tourist area. Thank you.
Good morning. Again, an honor, Mayor, to meet you this morning. I actually am here to a large part of the actions of our speaker earlier. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, was a witness to a lot of the transformation going on in that state, and actually worked for one of the first venture capital funds created by the state of Pennsylvania when the mayor was serving in the state legislature, and relocated to Florida years later to try and take some of what we were doing well in Pennsylvania and try and create some of that infrastructure here. So Again, real quickly, I currently am the founder of an energy company based here in Orlando. Also, I'm a partner in a venture capital firm, a consulting organization that works with the defense contractors on emerging growth and technology commercialization. And for those of you know, I'm also very active in the Metro Orlando EDC, really looking at what we're doing from an economic development perspective in this region and trying to move forward. Just real quickly, Planar, just to kind of give you a sense of what we worry about day to day, or what I worry about day to day in my business, is we're building batteries for electric cars. What we're focused on is impacts the transportation component, and what we enable is cars that can go 400 or 500 miles on a single charge that you can buy for $30,000 and that the automotive companies can sell at a profit. The battery technology really is, and energy storage really is a critical component to addressing the overall renewable energy challenge in this country and, in fact, on this planet. And I kind of want to talk about two things here very quickly. I want to talk about our innovation system and what we're doing here locally through the EDC and efforts that we've taken there, and also a little bit about energy and how that impacts what we're doing. So again, the theme here is combining this notion of knowledge, innovation, and how we do this on a competitive basis. And really what we're trying to accomplish on a regional basis here, what we're trying to do through the EDC is build foundation where we can export our goods and knowledge and explain in exchange for inflows of capital. We want to attract capital to the marketplace for investment for more growth. And it's all about a knowledge economy. And again, we refer to this, but this is really a different way of thinking about how we grow our region. And that the traditional way of growing it, where we're relying on our natural resources, we're relying on our geophysical location, and so the physical aspects of where we're located, which builds the first phase of your economy, is not what's going to propel us into the future. This is about mining and building the knowledge base of this region, and then how do we export that knowledge base in exchange for capital into the marketplace. This has huge implications in the terms, as we heard, the types of policies and the leadership required, how we manage our city, how we think about economic development, and to, quite frankly, who leads these types of efforts. Traditionally, these have been the roles of chambers and organizations who are out marketing and promoting all the wonderful things that go on in your region. Going forward, this is really about building intermediaries and partnerships, organizations that can bring together parties, that can bring together thought leaders, and through, like we've seen with Medical City, through collaborative efforts, create something that didn't exist before. And that's really what economic development is really about going forward. And this is about the notion of clusters. You can't be all things to all people. And so regions need to focus on where their core competencies are, where there is growth and where there is opportunity, and where we can create what we call the demand side jobs. We've seen, again, out in Medical City, the jobs exist before the housing exists. Again, this is one of the things that Florida's had a challenge of, is Florida's benefited from being a growth state, where essentially what someone referred to the other day as the industrial real estate complex, in fact, was driving the growth. Quite frankly, that's inverted. The demand side jobs, the high value jobs, the people that are making significant salaries that have high multiplier impacts need to be here to drive the growth. And so we have to create the type of investable scenarios and business opportunities where we create these high value demand side jobs. And that's talking about clusters, what you do well. These are the clusters that we've identified in the Central Florida region through the EDC. And the important part of this is not all clusters are equal. And how we evaluate clusters. Some clusters, like aerospace, for example, right now is in significant transition, and I'd argue in some degree of decline. So this has historically been a very significant contributor to our economy in terms of high-value jobs, but it's one that's challenged right now. We've seen life sciences as a growth area, energy and clean tech, digital media information technology. These are where we see the capital flowing not only into the market, but on a national basis. So I want to talk a little bit about energy and what it means to the local economy and what we're looking at here. So there is a vibrant clean tech cluster and energy cluster in the Central Florida region. There are over 300 companies in the region engaged in that. Actually, some of the major players in the market in terms of Siemens, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, all located in the research park out at UCF, are worldwide players in the clean tech market, and they have significant employment base, significant R&D infrastructure here. And if you also look at the Florida Energy Solar Center over in Cocoa, this is actually a state-level national lab quality research institute. This is a tremendous asset that we have in this region that all build the foundation for a lot of research going on, a lot of potential going on, And again, we have a host of progressive utility companies that think about the energy problem, not only in the way that we're looking at it today, but how we think about it in the future. So, you know, I think the single biggest challenge as we look at how we grow our economy, quite frankly, is energy. This country, the entire Western economy has been built off the notion of inexpensive energy, and that day is done. We're well beyond that. We're seeing that now. We're seeing high gas prices. And what's driving it now is not shortages. What's driving it is the fact that we have major economies coming online where the automobile penetration rate in India and China are vastly surpassing what is in the United States. The U.S. now accounts for less than 10% of the automobile consumption in the world, and we'll be down under 5%. What that means is there's a lot more people in the world driving cars, and we have a fixed amount of fuel to do it, and so energy prices are going to go up and up and up and up. And what that means from not only our economy, but how we think about how we deploy land, this really talks about density. The days of urban sprawl are numbered if we don't have the infrastructure to move people efficiently, and if we're relying on people driving cars using expensive gas to get there. So again, my company's focused on trying to do electric vehicles, but this whole notion of clean tech encompasses a lot of things. It's not only clean energy, it's clean transportation, it's the materials that go into it, and it's also water, right? We need to think about water and the importance of water and how we use water. That is a critical component of building the clean tech economy. And these are really the raw ingredients. And in fact, if you look at there's a lot of information up here. This is really what clean tech is. It's a wide area. It's talking about services from how we distribute energy, how we create energy, how we monitor energy, to how we store it, to the types of materials. And the good news is, I'll get to in a second, there's a lot of capability and a lot of foundation to address these key areas in the Central Florida region. Important part of this is where the capital is going. And in fact, the amount of capital flowing into clean tech has now actually surpassed the amount of capital flowing into IT, which historically has been the largest component of receiving venture capital. So clean tech is actually now surpassed. It is consuming a significant amount of capital at an accelerating rate. And if you start looking at the distribution of where attracting, it's actually in areas where we have good expertise. Solar, through the Florida Solar Research Institute, it attracts the vast majority of it. Transportation and efficient transportation, energy efficiency, biofuels, smart grid, energy storage. The good news is these are all areas where there are competencies, there's research, there's knowledge base in this marketplace that can be exploited to pull that capital into the marketplace. If you look at job growth, these are the most recent numbers, again, solar by far, but biofuels and biomaterials. This is the convergence of energy and life sciences, where we learn how to manage molecules more efficiently. They can be used for healthcare, they can be used for replenishing our energy feedstock. But the other part of this is that we are in a competition, as always, and you see the traditional players on here. The more challenging task at hand is if you look at all of these markets, and you look at the top 10 markets on a global basis, only 2 regions in the United States compete in the top 10 in terms of the amount of capital and research going on in the clean tech sector. So this is a notion, globalization is taking this industry on as the next big thing. This is where the money is going to be. This is what drives job growth. And again, we're effective in this country. We're building a strategy locally, but we're competing on a global basis. So the opportunities in Central Florida are these highlighted areas. Through, again, Siemens and Mitsubishi, we have heavy infrastructure and a lot of knowledge base in building the infrastructure for wind. Not necessarily the deployment of wind technology, but how do we build systems to build wind generation platforms. Solar, electrical storage, biofuels. In fact, Florida is ideally positioned because of the amount of lands that we set aside for wetlands is a tremendous area to start looking at advanced algae and other types of natural growing organisms that can be used to supply our food chain. And then on the actual use side, again, a lot of opportunity. How we think about the homes we build, where we build them, the type of energy efficient materials that are going into it are all critical. That goes into our commercial buildings as well. And again, as we've talked about, the type of transportation infrastructure that we're building. So we are doing a lot. There's some action. Orange County undertook a clean tech study back in 2009. In fact, I was here a couple years ago talking about the clean tech study. It created a blueprint for this region and how we look at clean tech. The county mayor has a clean tech symposium coming up at the end of April. There'll be some national speakers coming into that. The state of Florida, the governor has established a clean tech task force to figure out how Florida can be more competitive in clean tech. And again, within the Metro Orlando EDC, we've created a clean tech cluster group, which I'm chairing as part of my leadership role there, where we're bringing together CEOs of regional clean tech companies, started looking at the types of recruiting that we can do and the type of gap analysis, do some gap analysis of where we need to infill. A lot of activity going on the Space Coast. And we're very fortunate. We actually have a national program here that UCF is leading and looking at the best ideas coming out of research universities out of the entire southeastern United States. It's called the Megawatt Ventures Program, where I'm also a judge in that and actually reading through 43 business plans, which I have done by noon tomorrow. But this is where we're pulling the best ideas out of research institutions from the entire southeast, as I said, making awards for those winning teams to help build the next generation of clean tech companies. So there is activity going on here. We're looking at it not only from a business perspective, but we're also looking at it from our economic development strategy and how do we take advantage of this cluster. Thank you.
Well, good morning. We did a lot of research. Our last name was the Orlando Orange County Convention and Visitors Bureau, and we did some research. And you know, as we traveled the world, we find out that Orlando is the brand. We're very thankful to Orange County. Our budget is $50 million a year, of which we get $30 million from room tax, which is paid by visitors in the hotels in Orange County. But when you travel the world, not too many people know about Orange County. And we also have an Orange County in Southern California that also people get a little confused about when we're in the meetings, convention, trade show industry. And even if you have someone under the age of 30, Bureau, what does Bureau mean today? I think Bureau is a very ominous name, and people sort of think that you got to stand in line and get fingerprinted. So we want to make our name much more friendly. And I think the mayor, I think if I'm not mistaken, but Pittsburgh, isn't Pittsburgh, visit Pittsburgh? Right. My counterpart. So again, I think it's very warm. And to your point, Mayor, you did a super job, but I have never been to Pittsburgh. And I read a lot about Pittsburgh, and I've been there for a couple meetings, and until you see Pittsburgh, you don't realize how great a city and how great a destination it really is. But it's sort of what we do in Orlando. Our job is to get people here to see this great destination, and then they walk away with a much different attitude about who we are and what we have to offer. So let me just take you through some numbers here. In fact, as Greg mentioned, in fact, we have a little competition going on with the mayor of New York City. New York City would like to break 50 million visitors first. No destination has ever broken 50 million visitors. And we're on track. Last year we did 48.6. Our numbers for 10, we're a little bit lagged in our numbers, but we'll get those in about April, May of this year. And we hope to be around 49 million visitors. So this year in 2011, we're hoping to break 50 million visitors, which hopefully will be the first destination to do so. But it's a huge industry, as you can see here. It's almost $30 billion in visitor spend and a lot of jobs. And I agree, 63% is a good increase, but again, it's such a strong base. Almost, again, 400,000 people are employed directly or indirectly. And of course, we provide a lot of support to the industry and to the community. We're the second largest hotel community. The one that's bigger now is Vegas. Vegas now has 154,000 hotel rooms that they got to fill every day. Now, they're running about 81% occupancy, which isn't bad. I like to take that occupancy, but they used to run 98% occupancy at a much more higher average rate. So yield is really the challenge for many of us in the lodging industry. But also we have, which a lot of people forget, we have 22,000 timeshare units and another about 25,000 vacation homes when you consider Osceola County as well as Seminole. So when you add all those together, we have probably close to 200, if not over 200,000 accommodations to fill each and every day. And I don't think there's one destination in the world that has that kind of inventory and that kind of range of product as well as price points. And of course, we are known for that. Mayor, you mentioned it as well with Walt Disney World, but we're home to 7 of the 10 most attended theme parks in the United States. With Harry Potter, maybe that we'll add that to more of that list. And of course, #1 is the Magic Kingdom. And 3 of the 4 top water parks. Here's the forecast. I think this is very positive as far as where we are going. Remember, we were in the basement in 2009. It was a terrible year for all of us, not just in Orlando, but throughout the country. But last year we got to the first floor. This year we're going to get to the second floor, and next year in 2011, as you can see from the forecast, we're going to be on the 3rd floor. But what we're planning for this year, I should say in 2011, is about a little over 51 million visitors, of which the majority of those will be domestic visitors. If you break down that 47.6 million domestic visitors, the majority are leisure, but a lot of people forget we also have about almost 10 million business visitors, which a lot of people don't realize that we're such a strong commercial destination. International, we hope to break 4 million over the next couple of years. The #1 destination for international visitors is New York City. They do about 9.5 million. So we have a long way to go, but international is critical to us because what it does, it opens up other economic opportunities around the community. And you can see sort of where some of our key countries. Canada is now our #1 international visitation has visitation from Canada. We should hit about 1 million this year. UK used to be #1. That's dropped dramatically. In fact, over the last 5 years, we have lost a lot of market share from the UK. There's a number of reasons for that. Hopefully, we can get back on track. As you can see, we're forecasting about a 4.5 growth for this year. Back to the international, as I mentioned, Canada is #1. UK, we got to keep working on. And the most positive market that we're spending a lot of resources, we're putting more marketing dollars into South America than any time before in the past. Brazil. If Brazil was a visa waiver country, there's not one visa waiver country in South America. There's 36 visa waiver countries around the world, not one in South America. And that just makes it more difficult for Brazilians to travel to the United States. If Brazil became a visa waiver country overnight, we would double our overnight visitation from Brazil from 420,000 almost to 900,000 overnight. And if you use the math that for every 85 incremental overnight visitors, you create 1 new job. Just by doing that, that's 5,000 new jobs. Just by doing that. So those are the things that we got to work on because as we talk about connecting the dots, how do you connect Orlando with the world? So how do you make it easy for international visitors, whether you're leisure, whether you're business, to come to Orlando? The meetings industry is huge. In fact, we just did a study, the national industry did a study about 1.8 million events are held every year. Think about that, 1.8 million meetings, events, trade shows, conventions held every year, employing 1.7 million people that has an economic value of close to $1 trillion. That's how big the meetings industry is. And why we like the meetings industry is because we really are positioning Orlando as the place where the world convenes. And we like that because if we can bring in, again, business people from around the world to get exposed to Orlando, they may build a plant here. They may build additional opportunities here. Medical is huge for us. We're the #1 medical convention destination in the United States, and we have been for 10 years. So now with the medical city, how do we connect the dots? We're very excited about, we have CTIA coming in next Sunday, which is the wireless convention. It's anyone who's in the mobile wireless industry will be here. A lot of folks from South Korea, a lot from Brazil, a lot from China, all over the world, about 33,000 people. We're hosting a reception with you on Monday night, connecting the dots, because when you think about the healthcare community and when you think about wireless, there's some great synergies there. So, and that also exposes CTIA to what we're doing at the Medical City. So we're very excited about what we can do, again, with the meetings industry. But it's been a challenge. Corporate America, we went through the recession, CEOs cutting meetings. It was the first thing they cut is the travel budget. That's slowly coming back. Meetings are now becoming more popular with, again, the C-suite executives. We have a lot of space to fill here. We have a 2.1 million square foot convention center plus another probably 3 million, 4 million square feet of space. We have a total of 7 million square feet of space to fill each and every day. So that's a lot of meetings we got to get in this destination each and every year. And of course, everybody wants to meet during the time, during the prime time. February when it's, snowing up north, this is a great venue to be at. But in August, where it's awfully warm, again, that's the challenge, is how do we sort of correct these peaks and valleys and, again, keep more people employed throughout the entire year. There's 36 convention hotels. A lot of folks don't realize that, how many convention hotels we have. Some of our convention hotels, Mayor, in fact, we have about 6 of them that have close to 400,000 square feet of space by themselves, just with the hotel. It's actually the size of a lot of secondary convention cities in the United States. So again, just a lot more space and a lot more options for meeting professionals. This is an interesting chart. I don't like the chart because you can see that we have certainly trailed from 2006. But this tells you about our volume of business, and you can see where we are at 2009 and how we have sort of dropped off a little bit. But what's interesting, the red line is our share. So even though we have dropped because the economy has canceled and took down the attendance of a lot of the major trade shows because of just overall costs, we were actually able to increase our market share because we weren't the only one affected. The whole country was affected with, again, the cost cutting that corporate America did as far as attendance at trade shows or canceling the meeting or just not having the meeting altogether. This is another interesting chart about Vegas, Chicago, Orlando. We compete primarily with about 10 cities for the real big conventions. We compete with everybody for all the other events, because when you look at, there's about 11,000 trade shows in the United States, and only a few are very large. In fact, the top 200 trade shows are about 95,000 square feet and above. So you can imagine the bulk of that are small, about 25,000 square feet. So we compete with every destination there is. But these are the big cities, and you can see, again, I don't like this chart that much either, because even though we have increased over the last couple of years, Vegas has increased even more so. And again, it looks like Chicago is a little bit on a downturn, but again, Chicago is a very strong market. They got great infrastructure. We compete with them very aggressively each and every day. So when you look at this, the left chart, and top 10 destinations in 1998, you can see Chicago was number 1, Atlanta was number 2, Orlando was number 3. Okay, now if you go over to the right side, in 2009, Vegas, Chicago, Orlando. So we maintained our 3rd position, but look how Vegas has jumped from number 5 to number 1. And if you look at this next chart, which I'll show you, these are the top 200 trade shows. So when you see consumer electronics on TV in January, it's in Vegas every year, they get worldwide media. That's one of the top, if not the top, trade show in the United States. Well, the top 200 trade shows, and this is 95,000 square feet or above. Again, the left chart, Las Vegas, number 1 with 27 of those shows. Chicago, number 2, 22 shows. Atlanta, number 3 at 18. And then look at Orlando, number 5, tied with Dallas for 13. Go to the right, Vegas. Look at the jump they have made. They handle almost 25% of all the major trade shows in the United States. Chicago's number 2 at 25, Orlando's number 3. So we've made great progress over the past 10 years, but we still have a long ways to go to really get more competitive with Vegas and certainly take more opportunities with Chicago. We did book the plastic show, the large plastics convention that's been in Chicago for many, many years. We just booked that, and they're coming in 2012, and they'll be here every 3 years. So as I said before, you know, we can do, our job is to, again, how do we connect the dots, and how do we take these great assets that we have, whether it's UCF, the Amway Center, which is a tremendous asset, performing arts, the redo of the Citrus Bowl. How do we connect those dots to bring more visitors here, which really drives the overall economy? TDT, just so for your information, because I know it's a question, TDT was up 9.1%. That's a room tax, was up last year. This year through January was up about 5%. February will be up around 20%. March, we're very optimistic that March could be up double digits. So the good news is TDT is growing. Now, what it will be for the rest of the year, we think TDT will probably be conservatively, because I don't like to overpromise, probably in that 5 to 8% increase over last year, but good growth. But our job is to grow more of that TDT so those dollars can be used to promote, market, and sell this great destination, as well as help these new venues get off the ground, because that all helps all of us in this community. Thank you very much.
I'm going to be real brief. I think Greg is hoping we can get some Q&A in. I don't have PowerPoint slides. I was not able to participate in a conference call of this group last week, and the impact of that is you get to go last. But I would just real briefly say I think we're at an interesting time right now. My friend Blaine Strickland, sitting in the back, and I had a good chat the other day, and I think the question is where we are now. Is where we are now very similar to where we've been in other downturns and recoveries that we've been through over the last 50 years? And if you take just a quick retrospective back on what's played out in the real estate business, is there's been a real estate downturn, sometimes in conjunction with an economic downturn, in the early 1970s, early 1980s, early 1990s, early 2000s, And what we've been through in '08 and '09 is kind of out of that sequence. And all of those other, boom and bust periods, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, had a very similar kind of infrastructure that played out. And that was kind of an over-exuberant capital market chasing real estate, whether it be commercial or residential, which led to huge speculation, over-investment, and a huge wave of activity well beyond the true demand, which led to the big wave crashing. Tide goes out, taking jobs, real estate values, consumer, corporate confidence out. Everybody is looking at the ground saying, we're never going to come back. Well, the tide comes back in again a few years later, and we're back building up to a very strong recovery, which gets to the booms. And then, unfortunately, as we've seen in the past, we kind of repeat what we've done in previous years, our previous sequences. I think what's different now, or what could be different, not only are we off as far as this isn't the early part of 2000, this was 2008 and 9, but as the tide is coming back in, is it going to be the same? And as Blaine and I were talking yesterday, population and job growth were kind of just standard things that always happened here in Florida. And it was great. And is that going to be the case going forward? And there are a lot of smart people on this panel, and Blaine and his partner Jim Spaeth, who've done a lot more work on this, who's saying things probably are changing. And that what we can do today to be in a position to take advantage of what the jobs will be going forward is probably going to be different. And it's going to take, as the mayor said, the leadership and the vision and the strategies to make sure we're doing the things that we need to do to be competitive in a probably changing market going forward. To kind of summarize where we are right now, I would say looking back, 2009 will be on the commercial side, will be viewed as the bottom of the downturn. And 2010, things were better on the commercial side. Leasing activity was up, sales activity was up, but again, off a very low 2009 benchmark. 2011 looks arguably better, so the near term, it does look kind of like a repetition of what we've seen in the past. But I think for the long-term vitality of Central Florida, we better be listening to a lot of the things that the mayor said and others of what we need to do to make sure that we're going to be competitive going forward.
Thank you, Bill. I'd like to kick off the conversation here with a few questions and then invite you, if you have questions, to ask some as well. But to get us started, we saw Tom's slides showing that a lot of our growth is in professional and business services, which includes those technology jobs. We saw what Richard talking about jobs coming into Lake Nona in medical and biomedical. Scott talked to us about the energy opportunity there. So two questions. One is, what is really going to be driving us? Where are the jobs coming from that you see that's going to be driving us as we come out of the recession, continue to come out in 2012, 2013, and so forth? And then how well prepared are we as a region in terms of the things that we should be doing in terms of creating the environments, having the right public policies, the capital and infrastructure and so on to capitalize on those changes?
I'm the guy that doesn't belong
You
here,
issued
right?
the challenge.
I think, we talked, I think the bottom line is several. One is, and I think what Bill said is very important, is that I think it's going to look different. I would ask you, are you a $10 a gallon city? Because the Suez Canal, look at Libya. We have a war in Libya and gas goes up $1 a gallon. If the Suez Canal goes down, the predictions are gas will double overnight. So that's $8 a gallon. Are we ready for that? And that's a question you need to ask yourselves, because it's sort of our definition of insanity, isn't it? We keep doing the same bad things over and over again and hoping for different results. We've been having this conversation since the 1970s in this country, and nobody has had the courage to say, hey, we need to act like grown-ups here. So that's a game changer. If you're not a $10 a gallon city and people need to spend, I mean, I was just talking to a friend of mine in Washington, D.C., where gas, and she has 5 kids, and she has a big Suburban, and she filled her car up the day before. It was $93 a gallon to fill her car up. So she said, I never in my life thought I would live in this country and think that I might pay $100 to fill my car up. Does that change your behavior? Now, if Scott's not successful, we're playing this game of chicken. If he can't figure out a battery that gets you 600 miles before we get to $10 a gallon, that's a game changer for your city. The ability to educate your children for the jobs that are being created. And because if I'm a company, if I'm Siemens making a choice to locate a fuel cell research and manufacturing facility here, part of what I'm looking at now is what the workforce, how educated the workforce is. Because even the lowest paying job is going to be a technical job. I see that in the steel industry where 10,000 people made steel one time. There are 500 people making steel now, and they're all computer people. And that, you know, and I'm watching states whack the education budgets. You know, I don't want to be political, but it seems to me that what you're doing is cutting off the very investments you need to make to be a competitive community. And so they're the kind of decisions you need to make in a community. Do you invest in mass transit? Because we're going to be a $10 a gallon place here, and so you want to give people alternatives. You think about different kinds of land use. All those are issues that will, I think, begin to redefine the conversation as we come out of this recession, and will be the impact of choices that people, companies and businesses will make about where they're going to invest when they begin to look at those kind of connections.
You asked where the jobs are coming from. The universities are the absolute gold mines, in my opinion, of the future economy, and embracing what's going on on university campuses. We've done that. We're going to continue to do that. Tell a little story for the old timers here in Orlando. There used to be a building on the other side of I-4 called the Expo Center, and back in my day in local government service, I don't think about them a lot, but I made a recommendation to give the building to the University of Central Florida. It was very controversial. It took a lot of heavy lifting politically to get it done, because you couldn't just give a public asset away, even though it was costing hundreds of thousands of dollars in net loss to operate it. And today it houses the Film and Digital Media School, which has, you know, been the catalyst to land the VA's Center for Medical Simulation, in a large part grown because of the University of Central Florida. So you think about these things. If you think about them at the moment, you don't realize the incremental decision making that went on historically, and it's all about the relationships with the university. So for us, and for me, I see the universities as really the center of the future.
It seems like we've been capitalizing on some past investments, and I think, Tom, your challenge is, are we making the new investments if we expect a future return?
I think that's the issue, is that, I mean, you've had remarkable leadership here. I can see it in the quality of your neighborhood development, and the fact it's clean, the investments that Richard's talking about. Somebody had real vision to sort of say, we're going to invest in the future. You can never quit. You need to keep, I mean, it's sort of, now it's yours. You've got the ball, right? And you need to decide whether you're going to run with it. And we're at this political climate right now, which I call the big lie theory of government, which is that we can have great schools and well-educated kids and wonderful parks and safe streets, and the guy over there will pay for everything. And that's part of the conversation. I don't want to pay more taxes, but I also understand that you know, we need to invest in our community. When I first became mayor, I would get up in the middle of the night when there were not a lot of traffic and just drive around the city and say, my God, I'm mayor of this city. But I would also look at the infrastructure and look at the bridges in Pittsburgh and the roads, and think about the sewer and water lines, and say, how did they have the political will to build an infrastructure like that. It doesn't happen by accident. It happens because there's vision and there's leadership in the community, and it's our turn, in effect. And that's part of the challenge. And let me just add, just to really get political, is your high-speed rail was a no-brainer. It was a branding opportunity for you that's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Could have branded you as much as Disney World brands you. I understand that it was controversial about the cost, but I can say in Pittsburgh, we were one of the first ones to build these little rubber wheel connectors in an airport. And AdTrans, a Canadian company, moved their manufacturing facility to Pittsburgh. You would have been the first in the water. You would have had, for Tampa and Orlando, a huge opportunity to say, look at us, we're a 21st century city, in a way that nobody else would have had in America. And I think you would have attracted, Siemens or Chinese companies to come here and do significant manufacturing for the rest of the country. And so for me, is looking from a distance at that it makes no sense whatsoever. That decision, and I hope that you, Orlando, the people in Orlando and Tampa, can figure out how to get together and say, we're going to be growing ups here, and we recognize that there's a risk involved in this, and it's government money, and there's a cost, but at the end of the day, this has a huge potential far beyond the transportation impact of this region.
Scott.
This on? So look, I like that kind of leverage. I think the growth going forward is going to be a lot different than what we've seen over the last 20, 30 years. We're at a juncture in our region, and in our region, as we define it, is becoming larger and larger. I think it is the I-4 corridor, the Tampa Metro Orlando region as a mega region. Everyone else in the country sees us that way except ourselves. We have the ability to influence national elections. The I-4 corridor is always center stage now on election time, and as a region we need to behave as the region that we are, but we also need to look at it in a way where we're making the investments to create the infrastructure for the jobs that are going to come in the future, and are not the jobs that came in the past. There's a great story. I founded the Central Florida Technology Forum to put a face on the region's technology community. And we met a couple weeks ago, and one of the discussions that came out of that is workforce issues. And not the traditional workforce issues where we need to do a better job of educating and retaining the people that are here. The issue that came up is we need to do a better job of recruiting people here. The intellectual capital has to come to this marketplace. There's a company in this region that has grown by 600% in the last 5 years. Corporate headquarters here, technology firm. They've reduced their headcount in this marketplace, and they've grown their employment in Phoenix and the West Coast. Why? Because they couldn't recruit the talent that they needed to this marketplace, and it forced them to go to the West Coast and buy a company and grow their employment base there. So the type of jobs that these companies are creating, people pay attention to the quality of the community that they're living in, the quality of the transportation, the ability to attract capital, the ability to have world-class graduate programs at universities. That's why people move to communities. And again, if we want to be competitive in creating these high-value demand-side jobs, we have to be concerned about quality of life. But we also have to be concerned about making the type of investment in infrastructure for looking 20, 30 years down the road that people want to be in this community.
Gary.
I just want to add to what the mayor said about branding, because I think that we have a great opportunity to brand this destination a little bit different. I mean, not to take away from our great wealth and our past, but certainly expand. I'm thinking about medical tourism, and that means a lot of different things to most people, but we could own, I think, and be the epicenter for medical training, medical research, medical simulation, and really sort of take that worldwide. And there may be other destinations that do that to some degree, but in 10, 20 years, that could be something that would really be great for this destination. But I think it goes back to, as the mayor said, with the high-speed rail, is start to brand and start to communicate that difference as well.
One of the things we've learned about industry clusters is that when you have two industry clusters, like we have tourism and we have this growing biomedical, that a lot of the great opportunities come when those two meet. Right. And that's your point, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Do we have any questions from the audience?
The governor's proposed that we cut $3.3 billion from our public education funding. So how will we attract smart people to come to this area while we cut away our public education?
Actually, exact question came up last week in a session we were in. Is can we fill the 4,200 research jobs at Lake Nona? And I think the answer is yes. I think the ability to recruit for research positions like that, again, it's globally competitive. And the institutions that are recruiting are, as far as I understand, aren't having a lot of challenge. The challenge is really not necessarily on the research side where you have these large public and kind of philanthropic research institutions. It's in the private sector. It's the companies, you know, Planar, I'll use Planar as a great example. We're a small company, we're 20 employees, we're venture backed. I live and die by recruiting PhDs into this marketplace. And if I'm recruiting a PhD from the West Coast, the first thing he or she considers is, what if it doesn't work out? What if Planar doesn't succeed in creating the next best battery? What do I do? I'm stuck in that community. And so those are the types of practical problems that again, the intellectual capital people we're trying to recruit focus on. You know, with Lake Nona, you've got a great cluster of research institutions, and they coordinated, and I think it's a great branding and marketing strategy to recruit people. And if it doesn't work here, there are 3 other research centers you can go walk into. In terms of, again, cutting back on education, again, I think it's the wrong area that we should be looking at. Again, as my slide and the mayor's slide, this is about building knowledge economies, right? We're exporting knowledge. It's how we attract capital in these communities. We got to do things in this community better and faster than anybody else on the planet. That's what makes people want to invest in this community. And the seed corn for that is the kids that are coming through our education system. And we've got to capture them right down in preschool, and we've got to be able to keep them here through their graduate programs. And I'm very concerned about these cuts in education and what it means over the long term.
We have time for one more question.
Expand a little bit on your scholarship program for high school graduates, and also might also be applicable to grad students.
The high school, really, the impetus for it comes from the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. They put out a challenge grant of $100 million. Shows you how well our hospital is doing. And $10 million a year for 10 years if it would be matched. And in addition, the goal was to raise between $250 and $300 million to create an endowment that would then kick off enough interest to do this forever. And so the impetus was that, and this is why if Pittsburgh can figure this out, anybody can. We start 30 years ago with the lowest of the top 100 municipalities in the country, the lowest graduation level in high school of any place, because you could quit in 8th grade, go to work in the mill, get a great job, and buy a house, get married, and buy a car and a boat, and have a good life without ever having a high school education. My father left school in 8th grade, as a case in point. Okay, that all changed really relatively overnight, and so we needed, and Scott lived through this, and he's a product. He leaves, and they leave Western Pennsylvania because there's no opportunity. There are failures. Failures in the sense that they don't see a future for themselves there. So they come here. And now your challenge is, as kids begin to move forward, is that they need to see a future for themselves here in a new kind of jobs. And so that is the impetus for it, is the recognitions that we needed to have a game changer and how people perceive the need to get an education. And we have moved from not being in the top 100 to having the 3rd highest graduation rate in the country as a community. And so that was a community choice. I mean, it was largely financed by the business community, and there's been a lot of foundation contributions. So it was a community value conversation, and that's what I think you guys need to have. I mean, the tourism industry is a huge driver, but there's an overall community value discussion of what are our core values in this community that are important to us. Education, maybe the transportation issues, and those are the issues then. And I think ULI as an organization can be a key player in helping to have that conversation. And I've seen it happen in other areas of the country where ULI has played an important part in convening people to have that conversation.
This program is made possible by funding from the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, where government leaders, business executives, and academic experts come together to discuss major issues facing the state of Florida.